Here's a list of video games that are in a tremendous amount of danger. You've probably heard the news by now since it's basically left the D&D sphere and has hit the mainstream. But Wizards of the Coast is revoking and rewriting the open game license. What the hell does that mean, and what's it mean for video games? Well, I'm going to cover all that for those of you who aren't already caught up on the news, but I would just like to make it clear that I am going off of the work of other people in the industry who have been working tirelessly to put all of this information together. I am parroting them. If you'd like more information on this topic, I'm going to give you the high-level version, and I will provide a list of channels and videos in the description below that you can check out to learn more about the open game license and all of this giant catastrophe that's going on right now. Wizards of the Coast, the owners of the iconic Dungeons & Dragons intellectual property, have up until now had Dungeons & Dragons wrapped up nicely in something called an open game license. What that means is essentially that they take the core systems of the tabletop game and they put it into a limited document called a Systems Reference Document, also known as an SRD. Yes, that is where the channel got its name. Made more sense before I pivoted to video games, but it's fine. The SRD was intended to be a sort of open source document, so that outside publishers, both large and small, are able to use it to create supplements, adventures, homebrew classes, and various types of content for Dungeons & Dragons, provided they only use the content from the SRD and they don't touch anything other than the SRD. In practice, this means that the core game mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons are open source. However, the lore, monsters, and other IP, as well as stuff from the expansion books, those are not up for grabs. And where this applies to video games is that a surprising number of video games over the years have actually used the open game license to create video games. Now, tabletop role-playing games are a medium and, in fact, a fandom that thrives on creativity. That's literally the whole point. The game is just you hanging out with your friends using your imagination. So having the basic materials in an open game license and allowing the player base to create and monetize their own content is a fantastic match for the medium. It's led to a thriving creator community, and that creator community has been a very large part of why Dungeons & Dragons has soared in popularity over the past few years. But there's a problem. There's a big problem. Wizards of the Coast is owned by Hasbro. And Hasbro wants more money. The open game license is now being revoked and rewritten in such a way that makes it so that Hasbro now owns all of the works their fans create. While the term suggests that you can still freely monetize anything up to $750,000 in revenue before Wizards of the Coast starts taking a 25% cut of everything you make past that, they've also included a clause saying they can just say, "F*** it," and take a 25% cut of everything anyway. They just have to give you a 30-day notice. But you see, even worse news for us is that the open game license now no longer allows you to make video games based off of D&D stuff, which is maybe fine going into the future, but it does put the games that have already used it in a lot of danger. And okay, you might be thinking, this is Hasbro saying, we want to be the ones who make D&D games, we don't want competition, we're gonna come out with a big slew of games, and we're gonna take over the CRPG market, so we're gonna have this golden age of official D&D titles. But that's not true. They just canceled a shit ton of D&D video games. Wizards of the Coast has taken their D&D ball and they're going home. And what further complicates this is that the line between who's using the OGL versus who's just inspired by D&D is a blurry line. And we've never needed to worry about that blurry line up until now, because up till right now, both sides of that blurry line were legal, so no one needed to care where they fell onto it. Which means that if Hasbro attempts to get litigious with this into video games, then we're probably gonna see a lot of lawsuits from stuff that we never could have seen coming. But here's a list of 7 games that explicitly or almost certainly use the open game license. And you may want to get them now because they might disappear. We don't know what's gonna happen to them. Although an unfinished roguelike called Incursion from 2007 was the first game to officially be released under the open game license, the first fully completed OGL CRPG was a 2D game called Knights of the Chalice, which was based on the D&D 3.5 OGL. It's a pretty well-liked 2009 game that was combat-heavy and known for its difficulty. It actually just got a sequel this year, and it too uses the 3.5 OGL. It was heavily inspired by classic D&D video games like Dark Sun Shattered Lands and the Temple of Elemental Evil. So if you're interested in Knights of the Chalice as an old school D&D style game, or you even just want to support the developer financially through, whatever it is Wizards of the Coast is about to subject him to, then I would recommend you pick up Knights of the Chalice on GOG or Steam. A fairly similar game, and one that I've actually played quite a lot of, is Low Magic Age. Story? Low Magic Age asks? What's a story? Now, if you play the tabletop version of D&D, you might find that on occasions the role-playing can kind of overtake the mechanics. I've had stints with my groups where you can go like 2 or even 3 weeks without a single combat. But sometimes you've got this cool character set up and you just want to smash some stuff with it. And that's what Low Magic Age is. It's the opportunity to take your D&D 3.5 character builds for a spin. You'll absolutely tear your way through dozens of dungeons, with either a custom party or a party that you pick up and build along the way. Mind you, the graphics are fairly simple, and the game is still being finished, but it's still a remarkably fun way to scratch your itch for D&D. It's available through both Steam and GOG, but the Steam side has a surprisingly robust modding scene, so I would recommend going that route. Not every game based on the OGL is a CRPG. In fact, sometimes they're an entirely different genre. Worlds of Magic from 2015 is a spiritual successor to the 1994 game Master of Magic. Combat is not based on D&D, but rather upon the more generic D20 system that WotC put out as well. You do, however, get to build and customize your own Sorcerer Lord for each playthrough. Unfortunately, it wasn't terribly well reviewed, and although it was praised as a fairly faithful successor to the original, many were disappointed by the clunky UI and a general lack of polish. Now, another game in a kind of strange genre to use the OGL is the Sands of Slumber RPG. Western and Eastern RPG video games have had a very divergent history, with Western RPGs having always had a much closer tie to tabletop. But this game is an attempt to bring the two schools together. This is a JRPG style game where the combat is based on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And that's weird, but it works. It works really well, actually. The characters are all pre-built, so you're not going to be doing very much in the way of customization, but the trade-off for that is that the characters are all handmade, hand-drawn, and fully voiced. The level of polish for a free game that's still in early access is incredible, and I'm excited to see more from it. I mean, assuming it survives. Now, a lot of games may end up getting taken down over the OGL shenanigans, but here's a game that has already gone down several years ago due to infringing on IP. And no, it wasn't D&D IP that they infringed on. Demon's Age was a hex-based game based off of the 3.5 OGL that delivered CRPG gameplay to people who hated character creation. Based off of surviving clips and screenshots, it looks like this was quite polished. It included a system in which your recruitable party members were likely to betray you if you got into certain situations, so the game definitely had an identity of its own. So where did it go? Whose IP did they infringe on? And here's the thing, I don't fucking know. The devs don't know. No one knows. Okay, well, I mean, the devs may know now, but they haven't shared it publicly as far as I could find. Before Demon's Age went into production, much of the team was working on a project that ended up falling through, called Chaos Chronicles. Something happened, and Chaos Chronicles fell through in 2014. A fragment of the team moved on to found Big Moon Entertainment and created Demon's Age, built partially from pieces of Chaos Chronicles. The lead dev claims that they did all the paperwork to get all the old IP transferred to the new studio. And yet, in December of 2017, a company unbeknownst to us issued a DMCA due to Demon's Age having materials in it from Chaos Chronicles. This seemed at first to be an error, and a dev promised that the game would soon be back in a few short months, possibly with the content from the old project clipped out. And we never heard from the devs again. The game was soon removed from every single platform. I may have to do a video where I go full internet detective on this game because, like, what the hell happened here? Did they DMCA themselves? So a little bit of further digging indicates that a studio named Ceres Games might actually be the ones who are supposed to own the rights, but I mean, they're claim seems sketchy too. So, I still have no idea what happened here. Okay. So I'm kind of losing my fucking mind right now because I've been diving down this rabbit hole when I'm supposed to be like emergency making this video. But Ceres Games, the company that claimed to have owned the rights, they did a Kickstarter like rug pull thing in 2020 and they ran away with like 120,000 euros. So like they're the ones who claimed the rights. And can we really? What happened? Okay, I'm confirming right now. I am going to make a video on this topic because there are answers out there and I need to have them. Pathfinder, Kingmaker, and Wrath of the Righteous. What, you thought just because it says Pathfinder on these games that they're not using D&D materials? Guess again. Pathfinder is a role-playing system that was created in response to Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. People were not big on the changes made from 3rd edition. And also, Wizards of the Coast tried to revoke the OGL for 4th edition because time is a fucking sphere made entirely of stupid. And in response, Paizo created a role-playing system called Pathfinder that used the SRD materials of 3.5 and gave them a huge update and polish. There is a reason that Pathfinder is sometimes called D&D 3.75. And if Pathfinder is based on OGL content, then so too are the video game adaptations. These two games, created by Owlcat, are high fantasy adventures, with crunchy combat systems and lots of polish. Yes, I know the first one had a really poor launch, but it's polished now, I promise. Kingmaker tells the story of how your main character heads off into an enchanted forest to start a new kingdom there, with all the political squabbling and battles against the Fae that you would expect. Wrath of the Righteous, on the other hand, sees you take the role of commander of a crusade into the demon-infested World Wound, at the head of a volunteer army from all across the world. And now, the game series based on the OGL that will cause a $10 quintillion lawsuit between Hasbro and Disney. You may have already heard this around the internet already. Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, which are based on the rules for the Star Wars tabletop game, which was produced with the OGL for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. And it's...
Actually...
Who is this guy? Why is he in my video? Oh, shit. He's a lawyer.
Back in 2000, right in the middle of the prequel trilogy being released, Wizards of the Coast and Lucas Licensing, the wholly owned subsidiary to Lucasfilm that handled all of its licensing and merchandising, came to an agreement so that Lucasfilm would license the Star Wars intellectual property to Wizards to allow Wizards of the Coast to create the Star Wars RPG that was released in November of 2000. The Star Wars RPG was never an OGL product. Why would it be? Wizards of the Coast doesn't need the license from themselves to create a product. So, Lucasfilm and Wizards of the Coast relationship was not governed by the OGL, but a separate licensing agreement between the two parties. As such, when LucasArts, the gaming division of Lucasfilm at the time, hired BioWare to develop Knights of the Old Republic, it was completely separate from the OGL in any capacity. Now, Hasbro had a separate license in 1998 with Lucasfilm about toys.
Okay, you're getting off topic now. Anyway, that's LegalKimchi, lawyer, RPG YouTuber, and video essayist. Go check out his channel. Alright, thanks Kimchi. I appreciate your help squashing misinformation on the internet. But since we're on the topic of things that probably aren't on the OGL, but seem like they are, Celesta, Crown of the Magister, a very well-liked game based off of the D&D 5e SRD. This is an excellent D&D style game with a number of expansions. But, well, just like everybody else, they could only use the SRD content, which was open source up till now. The Steam page makes it sound like they chose not to rely on that, and that they actually got Wizards to give them an actual written license to use the SRD materials. If that's true, the OGL likely means nothing to them. Tactical Adventures is out here playing it safe. They're not going to pour that much time and effort into creating a 5e video game without having it in writing that they're not going to get rug pulled. They didn't trust Wizards of the Coast, and that, it would seem, was a very good call. Hey everybody, kind of an impromptu video this week. I was actually already working on a video that is now going to be delayed till next week, that included a bunch of games in it that are on the open game license. And when the OGL stuff dropped this week, I was really trying to let it pass and let everybody else handle it. But it just didn't sit right with me that many of the games in my video are in danger, and that I didn't really have much to say on it. I also couldn't really like squeeze it into that video. It didn't fit anywhere. And I couldn't just let it pass us by because this story is kind of too big, and nobody's really been talking about how many indie games this is gonna squash. And we like indie games. We hate when corporations squash indie games, right? That should be universal, right? And in that video that is now delayed till next week, I was going to introduce the fact that I have updated my Patreon with a couple new perks. So instead, I'm just gonna do it here. The big new thing that I've added is there is now a patrons-only podcast. And on this podcast, I'm gonna be sharing all sorts of behind-the-scenes details on my videos. This month, I brought on my friend Ko from Ko's Library, and we discussed D&D flight simulators, and we also talk about how that whole KOTOR being an OGL game, that whole rumor might have originated with me? Also, from now on, Tier 3 patrons will receive my videos the night before. And obviously, the old perks are still active, so if you want access to an 800-year-old role-playing game invented in Norman, England, and printable game assets for it, then you can sign up on Patreon. And, I'll see you guys next week. You get a little bit more from me than usual, because Wizards of the Coast caused an emergency.